Unlike most people of his time who would not notice anything less than 4 feet tall, Jesus made a habit of noticing those quite literally lower than anyone else. This may be one of the many reasons I am so fond of Jesus. He saw the little ones hanging onto their mother's skirts, and he noticed little Zacchaeus, who wasn't a child, but who still flew well below the radar. He noticed how adults would pay attention to children when no one else was present. But as soon as someone older, more important, more powerful entered the scene, well, the little one just disappeared. Children in the ancient world were considered gifts of God, and they would be useful someday, assuming they were in the minority who made it to someday. But in the present, they were pretty much a liability, another mouth to feed with really nothing to offer in return. Note that the child in the story we just heard is called It, not even given the dignity of a name. This child was a non-entity. But Jesus always seemed to know what to do with a non-entity. He took them in his arms, blessed them, even as a bachelor seemed to know how to hold them so their little heads would be supported and not wobble all over the place. Jesus never asked the parents to take them away, put them in the nursery because they were yelling during the sermon. Quite the contrary. The kingdom, Jesus said, belongs to such as these. They are not valuable in the future. They are valuable right now, full-fledged members of the kingdom of God. Now, to us, that might not sound so strange. We tend to idealize our children, dress them in designer clothes, send them to ballet and soccer and karate classes, take them out to fancy restaurants, and set places for them at dinner parties. Children are much more present in the adult world than at any time in history. A few years ago, Lisa Brown, a Houston attorney, took her infant to a deposition. And the baby did what babies do, made little gurgling and cooing noises. Opposing counsel did not appreciate this and filed a motion to exclude gurgling infant from future depositions, writing, "The child's presence is a distraction and unprofessional precisely because the baby behaves normally for a baby." He lost. And children are indeed cute, inquisitive, innocent, playful, vulnerable, and honest, especially if you're only around them for a few minutes every now and then. If you spend any length of time with them, you discover they can also be noisy, clingy, destructive, self-centered, and quite cruel. They will pull the legs off a spider or the wings off a fly in a heartbeat. So when holding this child in his arms and calling attention to it, I am fairly certain Jesus was not holding the child up as some sort of shining moral example, a template for behavior. He didn't say we should imitate them. What he said was we should welcome them. Further, that when we welcome them, we welcome God. Well, I was not a great student of algebra, but even I get that this is a pretty startling equation. Jesus is saying, if you want to see, if you want to hang out with God, go up to the nursery and get down on the floor with a 2-year-old, or sit and finger paint with a 5-year-old, even when you have something much more important to do. Tell silly jokes, sing silly songs with her, because she is not a distraction or a sideshow. She is the main event. Know that you will not get anything back. He cannot buy you anything, connect you with anyone powerful or important, or take you out to the newest restaurant. She can hug you the next time she sees you, or paint some fabulously abstract thing for you to stick on your fridge, but that's about it. He has no status, no influence, no income, which makes him absolutely great in God's eyes and likely just what you need. She gives you the gift of working on your own greatness by understanding that it is what you do when no one is looking, with someone who does not count for no reward, that ushers you into the kingdom of God. This, of course, is another of Jesus' many lessons in upside-down living. Those on the bottom are great, and those on the top are in for a big surprise. And in showing us that we should welcome the child, Jesus is not just talking about children, but about all the little ones, the ignored, the powerless, those with no status, no influence, nothing to offer. He is daring us to welcome them as bearers of God, to see that God's hierarchy is the exact opposite of ours, and that greatness is available only to those who could not give a hoot about being great. And this whole lesson came about because the disciples were playing the who's the greatest game. What were you talking about on the road? Jesus asks. And like kids caught shoving and pinching each other when they thought Dad wasn't looking, no one said a word. They knew they were busted. Peter, James, and John likely thought they had the best claim to the title of greatest. They had been on the mountaintop with Jesus when he was transfigured, chosen over the other 9 to do so. Peter probably pointed out that he had it all sewn up. First out of the gate to name Jesus as the Messiah and all. Surely that was greatest worthy. Of course, Bartholomew or Matthew likely retorted that Jesus had also likened Peter to Satan, which let the air out of Peter's balloon a bit and probably led to some squabbling. The heart of the problem, what I think triggered this ungracious display, was that Jesus kept going on about dying, which really confused and terrified the disciples. So they distracted themselves by playing Who's the Greatest? You know, the usual response to situations that scare us. Act like nothing's wrong, change the subject, talk about something that makes you feel big, strong, and powerful. So Jesus sits them right down and gives them a leadership seminar on the road to Jerusalem. Listen, he says, if you want to be first, you must be last. You have to be the servant of all. And he grabbed a handy nearby illustration, 26 inches tall, limited vocabulary, no income, God's agent. The last, the least of all. And lest we get smug and point out how well we treat children, we most definitely have hierarchies. More subtle, perhaps, than in Jesus' time, but most definitely present. And we have lots and lots of the least right in our midst. God help us. Jeff and I encounter them every day as they call the office for rent or for food. We do a pretty good job of making sure the first go first and the last stay last. Now, I don't claim to have an answer, an economic blueprint. I'm not quite sure how you operate a business, a church, or a country by turning it over to those with the least to offer. I am absolutely certain, though, that God's values are not our values, and we should keep that knowledge ever before us. However it is that we choose to organize our lives, God holds this little child out in front of us to remind us that God would organize them otherwise, and that there is no one, no one whom we can safely ignore. In the upside-down Ferris wheel world of God, there are no expendable people, and the least likely are the most certain to be agents of God, the ones who live just below our kneecaps, just the right height for us not to see, the ones who are always last. In God's world, gurgling babies derail depositions. Toddlers are bishops. Second sons inherit. Servants sit right down at the table they used to polish and are served lobster bisque from a silver tureen. And the greatest disciple of all is the one who waits on them. To enter this kingdom, you need to find a nobody, put your arms tightly around them, and say hello to God. May it be so.